Hello, writers. Have you ever bought a writing craft book someone says you just have to read?
Is it still sitting on your shelf? Have you even cracked the spine?
That's totally me.
Don't ask Renee how many craft books she owns.
Why do we keep buying these books we never read?
We all want to improve as writers, but that's hard to do alone.
That's why we started the Words to Write By podcast, to tackle these books together, chapter by chapter, and learn from their advice.
Or not. Sometimes they're wrong.
Hi, I'm Renee Nelson, former college writing instructor turned full-time writer and podcaster. After many years, I finally have a complete draft of my memoir.
And I'm Kim Smagato, author of the humorous fantasy novel Our Comeback Tour is Slaying Monsters, which is the first book in the Boy Bands and Dragons series, released by Riverfolk Publishing.
And now, on with the podcast. We're on.
Let's do this.
Let's do it.
Hello.
Hello.
Before we get started today, I want to hype our process group. This is a group of writers that gets together on Zoom through Meetup every week on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we talk about our writing, not critique stuff, but just like things we're going through, things we're thinking about. And it is really helpful.
So yesterday, we had a process group. I showed up a little late because I had some stuff to do. Man, in 15 minutes, this thing that has been plaguing me for like 3 years, like what to do with this chapter, I think I got my answer just by like telling people what was wrong and then them throwing out ideas. And I went, oh, that's such a great idea. So
yeah, and I've been struggling a bit to keep my word counts for this, to push on through this revisions process. And they give me a really good, I mean, it's not the other people tell you what to do, but you talk to them and like something goes on in your head and you're like, yeah, because they're all the writers and they all go through this stuff. And anyway, why I'm bringing it up is because you, our listeners, are invited to check it out. You can go to our website, wordstowritebypodcast.com, and right at the top, there's a link to get to this thing. Or you can go to meetup.com, and we are the Words to Write By process group. So just look that up. But anyway, you should check it out on Wednesdays, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Yep. It's fun.
And it's free.
It's free. We just hang out. We're really just hanging out.
Yeah. Anyway, so
buttons. We are finishing up the writer's journey. And you might be thinking, hey, you said you were only halfway through the book. And then Wade say, dude, there's not much more. I'm sorry. I'm serious. There's 200. Actually, I looked it up.
There's a lot more, and we're not going to do it.
No, I mean, I don't know how to describe what's in here. All right. So there's 202 pages left.
Okay.
And there's very little of substance.
There's an enormous section in which he just does movie analysis to show how this idea of his applies to all these different movies. And I don't want to write screenplays.
Right. So if you're writing a screenplay and you want to know how he's analyzing 4 movies, go to the library, get this book, find that chapter, and that's it. That's all you need to do. We're not going to go into it. We've already analyzed like 3 novels, so we're good.
And then after that, he's got a bunch of other essays that could possibly be really useful. Like sometimes you read those kind of inspirational essays or some aspect of a writing essay that really helps you out. But given the way that he writes, I just don't think it's going to be worth it to me as a writer. Like I spend more time trying to understand what he's saying than actually get anything out of it.
I pulled out either the important bits or the few things that are useful, if you trust us.
Okay, so this is the stage where we finish a book and we talk about whether it's worthwhile or not. And we talk about, the good stuff we got out of it. And as you can probably guess, we didn't like this book.
No. I thought it was very useful in the sense that I can see how an 80s movie script came together. I could tell what a perfect 80s movie script is, especially if it's like an adventure story.
And the 90s too.
Sure, lots of movies, but really, I mean, the ones that I really love, I was able to see this pattern in it. Mm-hmm. Like Terminator. It's like a perfect script. And they nail every single one of these steps, like in order, perfectly.
So you would find this book useful for analyzing 80s and 90s action movies?
I guess.
Anything else?
I don't know. There was that nice chart that we that was at the very end on page 239, and he talks about the acts, and it was nice to go through when I wrote the hero's journey like study guide, and I applied it all to The Hobbit. That was fun.
Yeah.
But I got all that information from the first like 2 chapters of this book. So I don't know.
So I found that diagram and the reference to 3-act structure to be kind of useful. I liked looking at the 3-act structure in terms of a play. The way having a physical set and having to get your story worked out required certain accommodations to a story. And especially the second and third act, even transitioning between the different acts. So that was one of those like, oh, I suddenly see this thing that had always been there, but I hadn't quite realized why it was there. And that includes when the first act, when the lights go down, you have this kind of time jump or the skip or something different happens to the protagonist because that's that structure. And then at the end of the second act, before the third act, while you have the crisis, you have an incredibly important thing that happens, but then you still have to have all the climax that happens in the third act. And that makes sense too. But books are not plays. And this book confirmed to me that I shouldn't have to be using a hero's journey for my book. And that might be actually a detriment to telling a more interesting story.
To riff off that, books are not movies. Novels are not movies. And one thing I think I've learned by reading this is that a lot of people who say they want to write a book really just want to make a movie. Mm-hmm. But they don't have access to the production and the things that would put a movie on because it takes millions of dollars or whatever. So they rely on novels
to tell their story. They want to tell a story that's a movie.
Yes.
But the option is only, either you're going to do a radio script or you're going to write it down.
Right. And a formula like this, the hero's journey, while on the surface may make you think you're going to like write the next Harry Potter. Let me tell you, the writing is way more organic process, especially if you're writing a novel. So to rely on something like this might annoy readers. And it's also something we're so familiar with, not just because, it's somehow part of our DNA and how our brains work, how it tells stories, but because we've been inundated with this formula in movies and other ways that it's kind of tiring.
What I noticed when we were covering the book is that the initial first act of the hero's journey, like that hits all the beats, and you look everywhere and you see those beats because that's a darn good way to open up a story. It's straightforward. It builds tension. It gets everybody in place. It tells the reader or the person experiencing the story, what to expect, who to root for. Even if it muddles with it a little bit, it's still there. And like you said, our brains are wired by this point to pick up on that. But the further we went in the hero's journey, the more hand-waving had to happen, the more like, well, it could be this or it could be that, and this needs to be this, and the stages could be in different orders and all that. And it just became a muddled mess where if you're going to apply your theory to everything, then there's not actually going to be anything useful for someone working through this to follow anymore. Like by the time you get to that crisis point, like your story's on its own. And this book is not going to help you figure out how to get your story from the crisis to the end of the book because there are so many different paths and your book has become such a specific thing that you can't just go and say, oh, I'm in a problem here. Oh, page 33 shows me exactly how to take the step.
Right. There's a reason why while we were reading this, we were having a really hard time finding novels that follow it or finding novel examples. All of our examples came from movies. Like Kim said, in the beginning, actually, almost like our first episode, her critique and her prediction was pretty much nailed it. She said that everything is everything. She's afraid that everything, it is. You can twist any of these steps to somehow fit. But do they really?
And is that useful?
No, not for writing a novel anyway.
So even something like John Scalzi's Kaiju Preservation Society, which hit so many of these beats.
Especially in the beginning, like you noted, right? Mm-hmm. The beginning somehow does well, but after it hits that middle point, it starts to fall apart.
Or the book does its own thing. And suddenly It became a lot trickier to identify where we were. And also, like looking at that book, the first arc of this hero's journey, not only did it hit it beat by beat, but it went chapter by chapter. It was 1 or 2 chapters for each of these things, and they were right there. And then you got to the middle, and there were these different adventures they took and all that, and that was like a really big chunk of story. It didn't actually have a set of stages that went with it, because that's a bunch of adventures. And then we got to the crisis and the climax. They came together so close that it was really hard to tell where one let off and the other one stopped.
But it did feel like he was trying to hit these hero journey beats. In the end, it just didn't come out well. And that, I think, was its flaw, was he was trying to make it fit. That's my theory. But how do I know? I don't know John Scalzi. I didn't ask him. Maybe that'd be rude. But it just felt kind of like it was such a rushed ending.
Yeah, I'd have to read more of his books to see if that's kind of what his particular style. I think it makes a lot of sense. The way books are set up, it does make sense to move those two close together, so you don't have a middle act.
Yeah, but for every advice you give or everything you notice like that, there's going to be a million novels that don't do that.
That goes back to you can use the hero's journey, especially the beginning, but then your book and your characters and the story you want to tell kind of take over, and that's where you go with it.
Right, and you want it to take over.
Yeah.
You don't want to try to hit these marks, because we're going to notice it, and it's going to tell a really shallow, hollow story.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Anyway, it is not a magic bullet. This hero's journey is not necessarily going to fix your novel. It's not necessarily going to help you write your novel. Maybe the first few stages, that could be really helpful for starting your novel. But unless it's a screenplay, this book I don't think it's going to be very helpful for people. In fact, I think it will lead them astray in a weird way.
Was there anything else in the book that you particularly didn't like?
Let me count the ways. I did not like how he kind of appropriated things. I don't like the way that women were mentioned in this book. The examples that pulled out for women or that involved women were kind of suspect. I really did not like that sentence about Tiananmen Square massacre. That was really weird. I actually told people about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're talking about this in the podcast. And all of them, had the same reaction I did. Their eyes just bugged out. And they're like, no way.
No.
I know.
No.
I have a friend who was, she's from China. She was living there when this happened. She was horrified.
Where was his editor?
I trying to figure out the choices and why those choices were made for this book. I wonder how popular this book is. It just kind of makes me wonder. And please, if you're a teacher, do not assign this book.
Or assign the first chapter.
You can scan it and put it in your reader. How about that?
Yeah. The other thing I didn't find terribly useful was the archetypes.
Yeah.
Because, I liked the concept of it, but it seemed very trite, especially once he said that different people could wear different masks of different archetypes at different stages of the story. That's just people.
There are types of characters, and you will see them. But again, if you're trying to write something, I don't know, interesting, it may not be so interesting. I am a little tired of just the comic relief character. Anyone ever remember Jar Jar? Come on. They get old after a while. And to have one in a book?
I don't know. You said the guy from The Witcher. Was it Sunflower or?
Oh, Dandelion. Yes, he is comic relief, but he has more depth.
He has other masks he wears, I suppose. But
sure, yes, other masks. We could talk in the language of this book and make it apply.
I think there are some other books that we could find that delve into the structure. So we did a really amazing book called Scene and Structure
by Jack Bickham.
That one was so useful for me to understand how the nuts and bolts of a story went together. Not the structure of it, but the individual mechanisms that make it click and make you turn the page.
How you make things happen.
For this, we were looking at structure. We were looking at kind of the form that the entire book takes. And Scene and Structure actually tried to address that, but it was very nebulous because there were so many choices you could make. His was more of a reactionary. If you had this cliffhanger here, well, how do you follow it up? Or how do you build up to the next thing? This is more here we're going to put the cliffhanger here, and then here we'll put a higher point of energy here. It was more of a big overview. And I'm sure there is a good book that does that. I would love to find it because I think it's a really useful tool when you are sitting with a bunch of characters and ideas and you just don't know how to lay it out. But that's not this book.
That is not this book, no. Should we talk about the last 200 pages just briefly?
Oh, did you look at the last 200 pages?
I did.
Okay, what'd you find?
Okay, I pretty much looked for what is it talking about? Is there anything useful in it? And didn't find much. Okay, so
It'll be short.
yes, this will be short. So the remaining parts of the book, after he's done with the journey, it goes into this thing called the epilogue, looking back on the journey, and he does it in a variety of ways. First, he starts with how his model works and applies the concepts to 4 films. The 4 films are Titanic, Pulp Fiction, The Lion King, and The Shape of Water.
Okay.
So if you are a screenwriter and you want to see how he analyzes that stuff, like I said, go to library. That is a really long chapter.
That could be useful if you are getting into screenwriting and you want to see kind of how screenwriters approach scripts and how they see movies and the terminology and just their mindset. That could be quite useful.
Yeah.
Possibly. I don't know. I didn't actually read it. It could just all be as regular hand-waving references to Westerns.
It could be. Yeah, I'm not sure. So if you've been listening to the podcast, you know we've already analyzed the plots of 3 other novels.
Yes.
To this method. So we're done with that. Like that's our goal anyway, was mostly for stories, not so much movies.
Oh, I want to say actually one thing I did get out of this book. I had a real fun time reading those 3 novels, especially The Last Unicorn. Oh, that was so good.
I hadn't read any of them, and The Last Unicorn holds a space in my heart. I read it along with Kim, and I will remember that experience forever.
Yeah.
I love you, Kim.
That was fun.
I'm so glad you suggested that book.
And it was fun to pick these favorite books or these books and to see how they lined up. It was a fun way to read a book with a motive besides just enjoying the book and saying, ooh, isn't this cool?
Yeah. Well, also, we'd both seen the movie when we were kids, right? Yeah. There's that special place in our heart with it. But bringing this up makes me think of one more semi-critique of this book. So I used to teach mythology and folklore. And if you've ever read some ancient mythology, it's bizarre. It's weird. Like, the hero's journey, sure, it might hit those steps, but in a very bizarre way. You know, the stories just took time to develop, I suppose. Or they're just very weird. Structurally, things happen and they don't make any sense. And yes, you can pull out these steps, but they're not necessarily always great for reading. They're not great reading material around reading mythology. So to try and like apply mythology, ancient mythology, to the structure of stories now, it's kind of anyway. The reason why I think the Last Unicorn worked so well and fit all of these steps is because Peter S. Beagle is playing with fairy tales. He's playing with folklore. He's playing with mythology, and he intentionally wove them in, but in a really good way.
Yeah.
So that's why it nailed every bit. It wasn't that every bit made it a good book. It's that he was playing with every bit. And he's a good writer, and he made it good. Then he has a mini process chapter. If you've been listening to our podcast, we tend to toggle between like a process book and then a prescriptive book, and this would be prescriptive, right? And then he's got the writer's journey. You know, he just pretty much says that the writer's journey is like the hero's journey. You know, the writer goes on a quest and blah, blah, blah.
And they get a mentor and they have a crisis and then...
Right. One thing I don't like, again, he tends to appropriate things and he says writing is quote unquote magic. Right. He compares us to shamans. I didn't like that either. That's pretty much all that was in that chapter. And then what's the big deal? Now, I thought this was interesting. He does have a nugget in here that's good. And part of the reason I think it's good is because it's appropriated to somebody else.
I'd like to point out that Renee actually has underlines and notes here. So she actually read this. So I think we give her creds because every process book, you can tell at a certain point, people drop off. It just makes sense that you get to certain points like, this stuff isn't nearly as good, or maybe it's or weirder. Or if someone actually was reading this, they would have told me about Fanny the stripper. Because there's something in it that's just so out there that you know that no one's actually reading it. So this is really good what Renee is doing because I'm guessing nobody has read this stuff here. Maybe not even his editor, but go on.
This is Kim's nice way of saying Renee has no life. She actually went through this book and finished it. Anyway,
she's a trooper. She got through an MFA program.
Oh dear Lord. Okay. Yeah. All right. So what's the big deal? This chapter actually talks about scenes. And there's one useful bit in it. And again, like I said, it's probably from somebody else because it comes from someone else. And he says that there was a story editor, someone named Miggs Levy. And he says that a scene is a business deal.
Okay.
Yeah. So, in a previous episode, actually, we compared and contrasted the different definitions of a scene from Jack Bickham to John Gardner. We did that. I'll link that in the show notes. And I even put the quotes side by side of how they defined a scene. So I'll probably throw this in there too, because I thought that was really interesting. And he paraphrases, says, a scene may not involve money, but it will always involve some change in the contract between characters or in the balance of power. It's a transaction in which two or more people enter with one kind of deal between them and negotiate or battle until a new deal has been cut, at which point the scene should end. There you go. I thought that was helpful.
I could totally see us doing a chapter on that in some future podcast, but not from this book. But yeah, good job. Okay, anything else?
I just moved along. He talks about the different forms that it might take, but he's already talked about all that stuff before, so it wasn't really that helpful. Then he talks about this thing called polarity. And I just want to give a shout out one more time to the artist. Whoever he got to illustrate each chapter, man, they're beautiful. And this picture was really pretty because it looks like stones from Stonehenge or something. Mm-hmm. And he says that, a story is part of two opposing forces. Duh.
Yeah, if you don't have conflict, where's your story?
Duh. It's just so duh. Like, come on. And then he says, okay, we need a single theme for the story. Sure. Okay, thanks.
He's got looks like there's a
There's a nice little chart. It just says there's the positive pole and the negative pole. Right. And then there's a central that says polarized system.
Okay. So of all the things you had to visualize, trying to show polarity must be one of the most easy visualizations out there. Well, you got one end to the other end, and there's a line.
Yeah. He applies it with some subheadings. I'm just going to go through a few.
Ooh, the subheadings.
I know.
Subheadings.
Ooh, subheadings. Yes, he loves his subheadings. These ones are actually numbered.
Oh, okay.
That's interesting. Also, the font looks different. But anyway, he says the rules of polarity, the rules, as if there are rules. He says opposites attract. Okay. Well, that's all we need to know.
Where does he get this from?
Polarized conflict attracts the audience. Yes, people like conflict. If there's no conflict, there's no story because people don't want to watch the happy lives of characters.
And, you could take out the first word there, polarized, and it still makes sense without it.
The pauses were great, Kim. I don't know how I'm going to put those in the show notes. I would like to. I don't know if they would translate as funny as that was. Then he has polarity creates suspense. Duh! Polarity can reverse itself. Okay. And he says, when the conflict heats up after several rounds of conflict between the two sides in a polarized drama, the forces that draw two people together may reverse themselves, changing from a force of attraction to a force of repulsion.
Oh, tell me, does he give us a definition of magnetism in here?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
well, okay.
Science.
Oh, yeah. Let me do that. Where is it? Let's see. Polarized. So under polarity can reverse itself. He says, among the curious properties of electrical and magnetic fields is the fact that the polarity of these systems can abruptly reverse itself. The direction the energy is flowing in alternating current electrical systems flips back and forth from positive to negative 50 or 60 times a second, while the magnetic fields of heavenly bodies reverse polarity infrequently, but on some mysterious timetable. For reasons that are poorly understood, the giant magnetic field of the sun reverses its polarity every 11 years or so, generating immense storms of radiation that wash over the Earth like invisible tsunamis and disrupt communications and electronics worldwide. Scientists believe the magnetic field of the Earth has flipped poles many times over thousands of years, presumably making magnets and compasses point south for much of the lifetime of the planet. Reversals of polarity on this giant scale seem to be part of the life cycle of stars and planets like a gigantic heartbeat.
I mean, he's right that the poles have switched.
Oh, yeah. So
it's correct. How does that help me write?
Then he says such reversals are also part of the life cycle of a story. So he got the science right.
He didn't get it wrong.
So the scientist has confirmed this analysis of how the magnetic poles work in relation to the sun and stars and blah, blah, blah.
Well, he didn't actually say how they worked.
Okay.
But yes.
But this is a craft book. You got to give him a bone.
Yes.
A little bone. Then reversals of fortune. Yes, people have money and then it's gone. Or vice versa. They have the girl, then they lose them. And then he talks about Aristotle. And we have talked about Aristotle in our show notes in detail. And I'm not going to go over that here. Then he talks about polarity in terms of words. Sloppy versus neat. Brave versus cowardly. Nature versus nurture. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we know.
When you want to take your SAT test, this is the page you go to.
Right. Just go look at the thesaurus and there's the opposite word in there. All right. So that is pretty much all that's good. That's there. If that was good, then there's catharsis, sadness. I have nothing. I have nothing to give you, dear listener, because there wasn't really anything there. The wisdom of the body. Nothing there. It's all about the vibes, man. This is pretty cringe. He starts talking about chakras here, and I'm going to admit I know -0 about chakras. If it's even a little bit woo-woo, I tend to avoid it because my mom was so much into it.
There was that one episode of Avatar, The Last Airbender.
What happened?
Where he released his chakras.
Okay. Do you think that was like a fair assessment of how chakras were supposed to work?
Well, it was a great episode, but, I don't know.
Okay. Anyway, he goes into chakras. He tries to apply different parts of the story to the chakras and how different parts of the story make your body feel different in different ways. Like you feel it in your body. Maybe other people are more in tune with their bodies. I don't get it.
I'd like to give a shout out. We had an interview with a romance writer in the previous podcast, and I think that her description of butter and tropes does a pretty good job of talking about vibes.
Yeah.
She did not mention chakras.
No, she did not mention chakras. I don't know if he's actually using them correctly. So he gets all of his, at least it seems like all of his information on chakras from this time that he and his friends studied the chakras as part of their spiritual quest in their post-college days, learning about them from an impish, chic palm reader, Mr. Singh Modi. I don't know. He talks about the 7 major chakras. I don't know what I'm going to do it. It was weird. I felt odd. I kept going. Trust the path. Pretty much believe me. That's what he's saying. This will work for you. And then that's the end. The end, my friend. The end.
The end of the book.
The end of the book. I'm closing it. I'm not opening it again. Well, I will open it for the show notes, just for you, dear listener.
Okay.
Now I monologue. Let Kim talk for a while. I need a break.
So we did it. High five.
Woo! We're done with Christopher Vogler's The Writer's Journey.
And now, as we like to do for these transition episodes, we're going to tell you what we're doing next.
Oh, yeah.
So, tell them what we're going to do, Renee.
Today, we're going to talk about AI. No, don't leave. I know, you might be sick of this conversation. We promise this is going to be good.
It's going to be fun.
It's going to be great.
Yeah, so actually, we don't just want to do one episode on AI. We want to do a small series. We'll talk more about the series in a moment. But first, I want to take us back because this is not the first AI episode we've done.
We've done this before.
Season 1, episode 28, back in January of 2023.
Dang, we've been doing this podcast a long time.
Yes.
Wowza.
That was back when ChatGPT first came out and everyone was talking about it and it was like crazy stuff and everyone was playing around with it. We took some writing exercises we had done in the past and we wanted to see how well it did on those. So I'll play the episode and you guys can hear.
Hi, ChatGPT. It's great to have you on the show.
What we decided to do was to test ChatGPT on some exercises that we ourselves have used. In fact, we decided to go back to good old Gardner.
Yes, dear listener, if you have not listened to our Gardner episodes, please do. There's a lot of really good activities on there. That was like the only good thing that came out of that book.
There was Fanny the Stripper. We can never forget Fanny the Stripper. But yes, so he had some very good activities that challenged you to write in different styles, and it just were really good exercises to see how far you could push your writing in a particular way. So we pulled up some of those ones to try with this AI. And I think what'll be fun is we could try this in another 6 months to a year and see how much it's improved.
Yeah. Yeah. It will be very interesting. And it's clear that it's got some limits.
Why don't you start with the gardener example of the bird?
So this is the second activity we ever did, I believe. And Gardner's activity was describe a landscape as seen by a bird. Do not mention the bird. We did this for like one of our first bonus episodes on the podcast. ChatGPT. We should give it a nickname because ChatGPT. I can't even say it. It's hard to say. Let's call him Chatty. Is that okay?
We'll call him Chatty.
Chatty. His name is Chatty.
Their name is Chatty.
The landscape stretched out below, an endless tapestry of greens and browns. Rolling hills gave way to fields of tall grasses and crops, dotted with the occasional farmhouse or cluster of trees. A winding river snaked its way through the countryside, its water glinting in the sunshine. In the distance, snow-capped mountains rose up towards the sky, their peaks shrouded in clouds. The air was filled with the sound of nature, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the distant lowing of cattle. It was a wild and beautiful world, full of endless possibilities and adventures.
So, points for not mentioning the bird, but...
Yes, it is rather cliche.
And furthermore, it doesn't actually have anything in particular that would make it sound like it was coming from a bird. When Renee wrote this for the podcast, we talked a lot about like what the perspective of a bird would be and how it would view things differently than human.
Yeah, I had mine like hunting for mice, because that's probably what it would be doing if it's flying. Yeah, there's no bird in it. This could be a plane or a drone or
Anything.
a Superman.
So I decided to give it a little bit more focus. And I said, in a literary style, describe a landscape in third-person limited point of view from the perspective of a bird flying over it. Do not explicitly reference the bird or any of its body parts or its feathers, but make it obvious that this is not a human perspective. So I gave it a bit more detail. And it starts with, as the bird glided through the sky.
Of course, it mentions the bird. You're not following the prompt, Chatty.
And then it goes on with, the breathtaking landscape below lay before it like a palette of natural hues, rolling hills, verdant forests, and glistening lakes, all contributing to the stunning vista. A winding river, its waters a shimmering ribbon of silver, snaked through the scene, adding its own unique beauty. In the distance, the majestic peaks of a mountain range soared upward, their rocky summits piercing the azure sky like sentinels of the wild. The air was crisp and refreshing. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the trees, creating a symphony of rustling sounds. It was a world of boundless freedom and possibilities, a place where a bird could spread its wings and truly be alive.
So it failed. Don't mention the bird. It mentioned the bird. It mentioned its wings.
It did mention its wings. In an earlier one, it did mention feathers, but that's why I specifically told it not to mention feathers. But yes.
So you have to kind of like fine-tune your prompt.
So I tried also say, in the styles of John James Audubon, describe the landscape, yada, yada, yada. And that also gave pretty much the same word-for-word description. Maybe it used a few bigger words, but not much. So,
yes, I guess if you're not reading very closely and you don't care about the quality of the prose, you'll get prose and it will be grammatically correct. Is it like good? I don't know.
it definitely has an idea of how other people have described landscapes, and it goes through the hills, the river, the mountains, mentioning the air and some other sensory details, and giving it a final little ending of the paragraph. But
it's not very unique at all.
No, it is not.
I would be reading this and I would be like, amateur. It's not bad, but it's not good. And I'm only going to read something that's good. So,
wow. We've improved. Our sound quality is so much better now.
Yes, we were. What did you think when we did that episode, Renee?
Well, my motive was, is it going to replace us? And at that time, I was like, ha, we're safe. But now, I don't know. I'd like to think that it's not, but I think maybe it's improved enough that we are out of a job.
A lot of things that would take us a long time to do, like plot synopsis
Yeah.
for this episode, or just regular copy edit stuff, or editing something that was already done to kind of up its quality. We kind of already do now.
Are you claiming we use ChatGPT?
No, we use another one.
Okay.
But like, it's been a big lifesaver when it came time to like write summaries of stuff.
Yeah.
Time saver, big time saver. So yeah, it definitely has integrated itself. Any other kind of thoughts about where it was back then or what to do?
You know, it did kind of what I thought it would do, where it was like really cliche. Like, I'm not surprised at how cliche it came out. And you could even hear, me like, oh yeah, it was like overdone, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, okay. It's easy to critique it. I'm actually curious how it's going to turn out now.
Yes, so that's what we're doing next. We took that same prompt, the literary prompt, and we put it into the current model of ChatGPT, and this is what came out.
Oh boy, here we go.
Just to refresh, the prompt is, in a literary style, describe a landscape in third-person limited point of view from the perspective of a bird flying over it. Do not explicitly reference the bird or any of its body parts or its feathers, but make it obvious that this is not a human perspective.
And we're still using ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is also how I was interacting with the chatbot. I was like giving it very explicit, like do it in this style, do it in this way. I think in later episodes we'll talk a little bit more about prompts, but that's where it was at. So we're giving it the same thing that the other version got 2 years ago. And it responded. The world stretched vast below, a patchwork of shifting textures and hues. The air pressed cool and buoyant, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth as it rolled over the endless green expanse. A river, dark and sinuous, carved its way through the valley, its silver surface rippling where the wind teased the water's edge. Sunlight struck the treetops, gliding them in shifting shades of gold and emerald, while the deeper reaches of the forest remained hushed and shadowed, their mysteries untouched by the light. Beyond the trees the land rose in gentle swells, hills crested with amber fields where tall grasses swayed in restless unison. A line of smoke curled from a distant dwelling, thin and lazy, dissolving into blue above. Creatures moved below, small, darting things that rustled through the undergrowth. The slow tread of heavier forms that left their prints in the softened earth. The world pulsed with movement, yet from above it all seemed serene, a vast and breathing tapestry unrolling beneath the boundless sky. Okay, so from a literary perspective,
That's hard to say. Okay, so it is better. It is better. It's less cliche. However, it is overly written. But then again, that's what the prompt is kind of asking for.
right?
It's, as terms of quality, its quality, I think, has improved. It also didn't mention itself.
Didn't mention the bird.
It didn't mention so it actually followed the prompt. What do you think?
Well, I'm looking here more content, and what impressed me was that one of the things we talked about, like the perspective of a bird looking down, or how it would interpret what it was seeing, it seemed to get that. Like it talks about the air pressed cool and buoyant, carrying a scent of pine. Like, that's feeling the air. So the way a bird would actually feel the air. It also talked about looking down, like it looks at the sunlight touching the treetops. And while the deeper reaches of the forest remained hushed. So that's kind of a perspective thing, like what you would see if you were above looking down and those details. And I think the place that really kind of went above and beyond was it talks about the creatures below, small darting things that rustled through the undergrowth.
That's actually my favorite part.
Yeah. The slow tread of heavier forms that left their prints in the softened earth.
Yeah. A bird would notice that because that's what it's looking for.
Right.
Yeah.
And even like kind of words like a bird would use.
Small things. I like that.
Yeah. So it understood the prompt much better. It understood what we were asking it to do much better.
Right. You get that soaring quality through the air. Yeah. In other words, I'm a little more frightened that it's going to take our jobs.
Like if a student was given this assignment and they took this form and they tweaked the words.
Yeah. I'd be like, cool, you did the assignment. Good job.
Yeah.
Now, is it something I'd want to read in a novel? No. But that's not what the prompt asked for.
Yeah, I mean, it's still, it's an exercise prompt. Like you said, you're not going to want to read a novel. I don't know if I'd want to read my version in a novel either. It's kind of, well,
Yeah.
interesting to see. It's a good exercise, but it's not engaging in the way that.
Right. I mean, the point was to get you to describe stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, make sure that you give the reader everything you can,
Yeah.
even though you wouldn't normally do that in such a extreme way
Mm-hmm.
in an actual book.
So we have plenty of prompts that we've done in the past for these books. And I think it's going to be fun to run them through the chatbot, and not just in this kind of very stilted way, but to actually start utilizing some of the interactive qualities of a chatbot.
Yeah, so that's how these future episodes are going to be a little different, maybe than you've heard on other podcasts. We're going to workshop our past experiences following prompts. We used to do that.
If you've been listening to our writer's journey episodes, we didn't do prompts because the book didn't have prompts. But previous books in the past actually did give us exercises. And I improved a lot as a writer from doing those exercises.
Yeah, we did an exercise pretty much every episode.
Yeah, and it was useful. So we have a lot of material that we can take a look at and see how the chatbots respond to them. And so that's one of the fun things I'm looking forward to doing, just to see, to lay it out, because I know those exercises. I know what I got out of them. I know what I put into them. And I'm really curious to see what these AIs do with them.
What is AI like as a workshop member?
Yes.
Pretty much, like, we're going to ask it to workshop, and we're going to see what it kind of does to our own work.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We got some other ideas too. We're going to do some interviews. We
got some big interviews.
Some fun ones where I'm really looking forward to it. I've been enjoying the interviews we've been doing in the show recently, and I think that's going to be a nice element. Tell us a bit more about the stuff we plan.
So like this little mini series, this podcast mini series, before we get back to books, writing books. So we're going to talk about how can a writer use AI? The good, bad, and ugly ways that one can do it. How should a writer use AI? Note how we said AI as a workshop member, not as an editor.
It's not a co-host yet, although
you can do that now.
Yeah, I know.
Which is scary.
Yeah.
We might actually try that.
Mm-hmm.
I have an idea. We're going to tell you how to write a good prompt.
Yeah.
Or at least the way we've figured out what a good prompt kind of does. We get a good response back from it. Is it really writing if it's AI? I mean, like, that's where I'm kind of...
And there's some interesting legal stuff going on. There's you sent me that link about the Authors Guild and where that was. So yeah, I think we're gonna delve into not only the ethical considerations, but also the practical considerations if you choose to start using an AI to do your writing. How is that going to affect what you do with your writing?
Yeah, there's controversy now, like you said, and there's like what it was. She was referencing. There's a certificate they came up with saying no AI was used.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're going to go into how AI works. I know. A lot of people have covered that, but we've got a special guest he's really on the inside of all of these things, and he's really going to break it down for us. See, what are the new and unorthodox ways AI can be used? We're going to really push it to its limit, dear listener. And then this one I came up with because, I'm a teacher. When we use AI, is it like cutting cognitive corridors, right? Like,
is it going to make us stupid?
Well, there's an essay, is Google making us stupid, which is really old. And the answer was yes. I mean, that author was correct. But, part of...
You can Google that if you want to read about it.
Yeah. Or you were in a composition class 20 years ago and you read it. Right? Like going through the process of having to read things and come up with your own conclusions before AI, that was giving you experience. Like your brain, you were getting smarter.
Well, that's why we did the exercises. We did the exercises to gain the experience to apply it to our writing. So the question is, if you're using AI, are you atrophying those parts? Are you never going to develop them? Are you going to be completely hopeless?
I mean, honestly, if I was still teaching composition,
You'd quit?
well, I quit actually at the exact moment, the moment ChatGPT came out. That was my last semester. But I knew that if I was going to keep teaching, I was only going to do in-class essays. And I maintain that. Like if I was ever teaching again, I would never, ever let my students write essays from home. I know that might be controversial, but it's just the low-hanging fruit is too much. Students wouldn't be able to help themselves. It's not really their fault. But writing is thinking. And you have to develop your own ideas. I mean, you have to develop them. There's no developing involved if you're just asking ChatGPT to do it all for you.
Definitely what we did just now with the exercise shows kind of how easy it is to slip into just letting an AI do it all. Anyway, so controversy.
Totally.
And listeners, we would love to hear from you about your experiences or things you want to hear about AI from the podcast or whatever. Just write to us at words to write by podcast
At gmail.com.
At gmail.com, and we'll put a link. And yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, if you're a writer and you have a really, have a question, we'd love to read it and then maybe answer it on the podcast. Or if you have a question about how AI works or some logistical thing like that, we have an insider that we're going to interview and we could pose that question to him.
Yeah, absolutely. In the interviews, if you guys send us any questions that look interesting, we will include them in the interviews.
Yeah. Or you could just email us and say that you really like our podcast, and that would help us give us a little boost.
Yeah, we'd love that. Okay, so we already talked about the process group. We're not inviting an AI to it. It's going to be all humans.
We'll be all humans.
We'd love to have you join us.
Oh, God, at some point, do you think there's going to be like you're on Zoom and you don't know if the person in the screen is a real person?
Well, I'd prefer them for a Zoom bomber if they're polite.
Yeah. Yeah.
The future. Okay. And if you are listening to this podcast through Apple Podcasts or something, and there's a way to rate or review, we'd love that. If you know a writer that you think would be interested in this whole AI discussion we're going to have, let them know about the podcast.
So again, we're going to go back to our regularly scheduled programming after the next few episodes, but this is going to be really fun.
Yep. Tune in next week. Bye-bye.
Tune in next week. Bye-bye.
Words to Write By is produced by Renee Nelson and Kim Smiga-Otto. Our theme music is Roll Back the Carpet by Cool Cat Music. Have a great day.
I will say this is the longest project I've ever continued working on.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.